Bom dia a todos. Peço desculpa, estou um pouco rouco. Antes de mais, vou repetir um pouco aquilo que foi já dito, mas é uma honra estar aqui como antigo aluno do Liceu Francês e de ver que a Associação dos Antigos Alunos é tão ativa e consegue fazer eventos de tão alto nível, o que não só se destaca de outras associações da rede de escolas francesas, mas também a nível nacional. Não é fácil organizar este tipo de eventos e a nossa associação tem conseguido. E, portanto, muitos parabéns à Ani e à Rebeca, nomeadamente, e a toda a equipa, naturalmente. Começando, então, nos nossos temas, arrancamos com o terrorismo. É, naturalmente, uma questão muito complexa, que pode ser abordada de diferentes abordagens. Nós optámos por ter 3 pessoas que são das mais prestigiadas nas áreas em que tocam no tema do terrorismo. Primeiro, a doutora Ana Gomes, eurodeputada desde 2004. Se quiser, a doutora, pode ir sentando. Eurodeputada desde 2004, reeleita já por 2 vezes. É alguém que, para quem segue o debate público e o debate político em Portugal, tem sido uma das vozes mais ativas na defesa dos direitos humanos e na reflexão à volta do papel da União Europeia na defesa das liberdades. Temos também, numa perspectiva mais da cibersegurança, o Dr. Jarno Limnell, que também convido a vir para o seu lugar. O professor Jarno Limnell é professor de cibersegurança na Universidade de Aalto, na Finlândia, e também professor adjunto na Universidade de Tecnologia de Tampere, Finlândia. É, portanto, um académico e um especialista nesta área e vice-presidente para a cibersegurança no Instagroup. Depois, para concluir o nosso painel, temos o Dr. Peter Newman. É um académico, doutorado no King's College em War Studies. Eu traduziria por estudos de guerra, mas julgo que War Studies é um tema muito forte na academia, que se explica por si próprio. É também alguém que colabora ativamente com a imprensa e com a comunicação social e, portanto, faz parte do debate público à volta do tema do terrorismo e que tem uma dimensão na abordagem mais de geoestratégia e de combate mesmo às organizações terroristas e também à radicalização dentro das sociedades europeias. Sem mais demoras, vou dar a palavra à doutora Ana Gomes para a primeira intervenção. Não sei se haverá microfone. Então, se quiser fazer do seu lugar, tudo bem.
Muito bem. Muito prazer em estar aqui convosco e não é a primeira vez que estou com a associação e saúdo a iniciativa e, em particular, a Rebeca, que me desafiou para estar hoje aqui convosco e, em particular, para discutir este tema. Porque, de facto, sendo alguém que, ao longo da sua carreira profissional e da sua vida política, sempre procurou centrar-se na defesa dos direitos humanos, dos direitos fundamentais, como nós dizemos no plano europeu, foi exatamente nesse processo que percebi que as questões da segurança eram essenciais à defesa dos direitos humanos e era essencial perceber aos responsáveis políticos que tinham que dar uma resposta às questões da segurança, porque sem segurança também não há direitos humanos, tudo fica em causa. E esse processo foi particularmente aprendido na minha passagem pela Indonésia, onde durante 4 anos fui embaixadora, portanto representante de Portugal. E num período em que a Al-Qaeda, através da sua filière local, a Jemaah Islamiyah, estava já extremamente ativa e fazia mortes sistematicamente. Recentemente, estes ataques de Surabaya a igrejas em Surabaya fizeram-me recordar que, nessa altura, também as igrejas eram particularmente os alvos. E é claro que no resto do mundo ninguém dava por nada, porque só morriam indonésios. Quando houve a bomba de Bali, em 2002, de repente morreram 200 estrangeiros, incluindo um português, soldado Diogo Ribeirinho. por cujos restos eu tive que ir à procura. Foi uma coisa muito penosa que me ajudou a perceber que, de facto, as questões do terrorismo, do combate ao terrorismo, eram questões essenciais da responsabilidade dos políticos e que, ainda por cima, sendo eu de esquerda, tinha que ter uma resposta de esquerda para as ansiedades dos cidadãos relativamente ao fenómeno do terrorismo. E é por isso que hoje, no Parlamento Europeu, desde logo me fiz membro, desde que entrei no dia 1 no Parlamento Europeu, me fiz membro da Subcomissão de Segurança e Defesa, de que sou membro até hoje, e também agora sou porta-voz de uma comissão especial que nós criámos há um ano, exatamente uma comissão especial sobre o terrorismo. Eu sou porta-voz do meu grupo político, a comissão é dirigida por uma francesa, a Nathalie Griesbeck, e temos tido audições regulares. Como? Temos tido audições regulares com peritos de todo o mundo e, em particular, europeus, e é evidente que nos temos centrado também na análise dos atos de terrorismo que têm ocorrido na Europa. E eu gostava de evocar dois episódios. Um que tem a ver exatamente com este título, Combater os Medos. Esta é uma questão essencial, como foi dito. Suponho que foi a Sra. Ana Lopes Moreira, combater os medos medos toda a gente tem, é natural ter. Aliás, seria até muito anormal não ter medo. A questão é que é preciso combatê-lo, é preciso controlá-lo. E eu lembro-me de um episódio de onde resultou a minha amizade com o já falecido ex-ministro Ali Alatas. Eu já o conhecia bem, mas não era amiga, mas a partir desse dia ficámos mesmo amigos. Houve um dia de celebração do aniversário da cidade de Jakarta, de Batávia. Havia um navio holandês que evocava o velho navio Batávia, que havia todo um programa de celebrações. O corpo diplomático estava convidado para lá estar, às 10 da manhã, no porto de Batávia. E às 8 da manhã veio as notícias que 3 ou 4 igrejas nos arredores de Jakarta tinham saltado e morrido imensa gente. E toda a gente ficou transida, toda a gente... E eu perguntei-me, vou ou não vou? E disse, vou, tenho que ir. É a hora que mais faltava ceder ao que eles querem, que é exatamente que a gente tenha medo. Vou. E fui. E tirando o embaixador holandês, só lá estava eu e o Ali Alatas. E, portanto, nesse dia começou uma amizade com o Ali Alatas, porque ele apreciou especialmente que, de facto, aqueles que lá foram, e percebemos todos que, de facto, era preciso ir e mostrar que não se tem medo. O outro episódio foi recentemente, quando na Comissão de Inquérito do Parlamento Europeu sobre Terrorismo recebemos um jornalista francês que esteve 10 meses sequestrado na Síria pelo ISIS, pelo Daesh, pelo chamado Estado Islâmico, Nicolas Hénin. Nicolas Hénin viveu, portanto, com os seus captores, à mercê dos seus captores, e hoje tem um conhecimento extraordinário e tem uma campanha de esclarecimento que passa por alertar as pessoas que a maior parte, 95% das vítimas de terrorismo são muçulmanos e que é uma estupidez total, é uma derrota identificarmos, por um lado, terrorismo com o Islão. E eu, por exemplo, nas audições que temos feito, ainda recentemente estivemos em Espanha, numa missão de estudo em Espanha com os responsáveis de terrorismo, e todos os responsáveis da polícia, etc., falavam de terrorismo jihadista, terrorismo jihadista. E isto é um erro brutal, porque é não perceber que falar de terrorismo jihadista é a mesma, ou muçulmano, é a mesma coisa que falar de terrorismo católico na Irlanda ou terrorismo do Espírito Santo, por exemplo. E não é do BES que eu falo, é do Espírito Santo da religião. É uma estupidez, é alienar aqueles que nós precisamos absolutamente de ter connosco no combate aos terroristas, que não são só... que estes que invocam o Islão pervertem o Islão E que não são os únicos, porque temos todo tipo de terrorismo, e designadamente terrorismo de extrema-direita, como aconteceu na Noruega, o Breivik. Mas o Nicola Hayek disse mais. Chamou a atenção que, de facto, não associar o terrorismo aos refugiados, e designadamente aos refugiados, na maioria muçulmanos, que não são só muçulmanos também, os que fogem da Síria, há tantos cristãos, tantos de outras religiões, mas em particular muitos cristãos. E uma das coisas que mais me comoveu na vida foi em Erbil, no Iraque, assistir num campo de refugiados improvisado junto a uma igreja caldeica, portanto cristã, ter visto um conjunto de pessoas, homens, mulheres e crianças, a rezar, e tinham feito uma gruta de evocação de Fátima, dos Três Pastorinhos de Fátima. Eu, que não sou católica, devo dizer que fiquei comovidíssima. Mas o Nicola Hayek chama a atenção que o fluxo de refugiados, designadamente de maioria muçulmana, que veio para a Europa, que continua a vir, enfim, hoje a outro ritmo, é em si a demonstração da derrota do ISIS. E ele até identifica o atentado terrorista do Bataclan, portanto de Paris, em 2015, como uma tentativa exatamente do ISIS, do Daesh, manipular a opinião pública europeia para exatamente desencadear o medo e até como revanchismo relativamente à fuga daqueles milhares, milhões de muçulmanos que fogem daquilo que eles tentavam vender como o califato islâmico e, portanto, o suprassumo do que poderia proteger os muçulmanos. Eu penso que estes são aspectos muito importantes e que escapam à maioria dos comentadores e até dos operacionais, e que não podemos ser eficazes no combate ao terrorismo sem perceber estes aspectos fundamentais, do meu ponto de vista.
Desculpem. Como ainda temos aqui dois minutos, ia-lhe perguntar, do ponto de vista do seu trabalho a nível das instituições europeias e nas comissões de parlamentares que mencionou, o que é que acha que é possível fazer mais a nível europeu?
Bom, eu acho que nós temos um grande problema. Porque é que criámos esta comissão de inquérito? Exatamente para tentar analisar e identificar quais são os principais problemas, os principais defeitos e o principal defeito, penso eu, é que quando há um atentado terrorista, os governos reagem à puxada. A quente, tem que fazer qualquer coisa. Por exemplo, lembram-se todos, quando foi justamente o Bataclan, quando vieram dizer que era preciso o PNR, e o Parlamento Europeu, o PNR, Passenger Name Records, aquele sistema de listas de informação sobre os dados dos cidadãos que viajam nos voos, designadamente podendo ir para a Síria ou vir de qualquer lado para a Europa para cometer atentados terroristas. É um esquema idêntico ao que, portanto, os americanos exigem, que a Europa, portanto, acordou com os americanos, e, portanto, havia a necessidade do Parlamento Europeu aprovar um projeto de PNR, que é um instrumento importante para as polícias, exatamente, identificarem os suspeitos e os movimentos, etc. Mas é um instrumento. Não é mais do que isso. Não é a bala mágica que os governos todos assinaram que ia resolver o problema do terrorismo. Culpa do Parlamento Europeu, que não passa, tem aquilo há 2 anos parado. O Parlamento Europeu tinha aquilo há 2 anos parado por muito boas razões. Exatamente porque, dizíamos, não passamos o PNR, porque o PNR até é uma forma intrusiva, digamos, e pode ser abusiva da privacidade dos cidadãos, e enquanto os governos não passarem, o Conselho não passar, olhem, o Regulamento Geral de Proteção de Dados que entrou em vigor na sexta-feira passada. O Regulamento Geral de Proteção de Dados, que é o conjunto de normativo que aperta e que defende os direitos individuais e a privacidade dos cidadãos na era digital, face aos escândalos como este da Cambridge Analytica, etc. Portanto, o Regulamento Geral de Proteção de Dados estava há 5 anos a aboborar no Conselho, que não o passava, com todo o tipo de... E o Parlamento fez um braço de ferro, dizendo, querem o PNR, passem primeiro o Regulamento Geral de Proteção de Dados. E foi graças a isso que se aprovou primeiro o Regulamento Geral de Proteção de Dados, e, portanto, ele entrou em vigor 2 anos depois, na sexta-feira passada, e ele era a maior importância para os cidadãos. Aqui temos um regulamento que é europeu e que tem um impacto a nível global, porque não há outro. Até o Zuckerberg, nas audições no Congresso, teve que admitir que estas eram as regras que se aplicavam a todas as grandes plataformas digitais, porque, obviamente, elas querem continuar a fazer negócio e chorudo na Europa. Mas nós, e portanto foi por causa disso que nós passámos o PNR. Os governos apresentavam o PNR como de facto essa bala mágica. E à partida não é. O PNR não está a ser aplicado na maior parte dos países europeus. Estão a estudar, incluindo aqui, estão a estudar a aplicação. E o PNR, à partida, tinha um principal defeito, até do ponto de vista, digamos, do objetivo operacional. E eu e um colega francês, do PPE, no Parlamento Europeu, muitas vezes trabalha-se across the aisle, portanto, em forma, enfim, concertada com todas as famílias políticas, e eu, conjuntamente com um colega francês, Arnaud Danjean, do PPE, aliás, um homem que vem experiente, vem da segurança, exatamente, fizemos uma proposta de que o PNR, o regulamento PNR, não se aplicasse apenas aos voos civis privados, portanto, das companhias aéreas, mas incluísse também voos privados e voos charter. Porque, inclusivamente, sabemos que o tráfico, naquela altura, para a Síria, dos chamados foreign fighters, que é outro erro, foreign fighters dá a ideia que eles são estrangeiros. Não, eles são nossos. E a maioria dos que têm atacado no nosso território são nossos cidadãos. Uma das áreas onde nós trabalhamos também é entender o fenómeno da radicalização, porque trata-se, na maior parte, de cidadãos europeus. E, portanto, nós fizemos essa proposta que se incluísse os voos civis privados e voos charter. Os voos civis privados são muito importantes. São os voos dos príncipes sauditas, por exemplo, que aterram em Nice, ou aqui em Tirza, no caso dos príncipes, as princesas angolanas, e que ninguém controla. E, por exemplo, no Líbano, há algum tempo foi travado um voo desses, de um príncipe saudita, que levava um carregamento de uma tonelada de Captagon. Captagon é a droga que os fighters do ISIS utilizavam para as suas salvajarias. Se calhar, se forem nisso, ou se for aqui em Tires, o saudita vem com as doses de Captagon e o resto, as malas de dinheiro, etc., ninguém controla. Portanto, nós fizemos essa proposta e eu devo dizer que eu baseei-me. Porquê é que eu me baseei na existência dos voos civis privados? Porque eu sabia, por causa da investigação dos chamados voos da CIA, portanto, dos voos da tortura no quadro do programa das renditions, que isto era mato. Não havia, o controle era perfunctório relativamente aos voos civis privados, de quem tem dinheiro ou de quem para alugar esse tipo de aviões. Curioso. Os Estados-membros não aceitaram interesses, as companhias de turismo, etc. E, portanto, o PNR, que era a tal bala mágica, tem este tremendo flaw, tremendo problema. Fala-se com qualquer operador de qualquer polícia Europol e ele diz, bom, e a maior parte dos países nem sequer está implementado. Portanto, há muito fogotório quando há o atentado terrorista. As medidas, efetivamente, de longo prazo, de fundo, que têm a ver exatamente com o problema da radicalização, enfim, essa é toda outra área, com certeza se calhar falaremos, porque tem muito a ver também com o processo, os mídia online, e hoje boa parte da radicalização faz-se online, portanto, tudo isso que poderia efetivamente, que exigiria programas de prevenção da radicalização, há algumas coisas que estão feitas na União Europeia, que estão a fazer-se. Há uma rede chamada RAN, de combate à radicalização, que também visa não só ajudar a detectar casos e a travá-los, mas a ter toda uma contranarrativa, mas, de facto, eu acho que há uma grande incoerência entre todo o fogotório que se faz quando há um atentado terrorista e, de facto, as medidas práticas e eficazes, embora já muito se tenha avançado.
Muito obrigado, doutora. Ia passar a palavra ao Dr. Jarno Limnell. Julgo que you have a presentation, right?
Yes, I have.
Portanto, como a doutora Ana Gomes estava a introduzir, o Dr. Jarno Limnell é um especialista em cibersegurança e, portanto, tem um conhecimento profundo precisamente nesta questão da relação do terrorismo com as novas tecnologias e com a radicalização online. Professor, please start when you want.
Thank you very much, and excellent good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And I have to say that it's my privilege to be here in Lisbon. I just flew from Helsinki, and very nice to be in this part of the Europe at the moment. And thank you very much for your kind invitation, and it has said many important issues already this morning. Like we heard, when we are talking about security, when we are talking about our fears, I think it's very important that we talk about these issues openly and honestly, and understand better, especially from the technological point of view, where the world is going. And I think that many of you have also read, I feel it, the latest wide research in the whole Eurobarometer, which tries to find out what are the issues what us Europeans in Finland, in Portugal, in Germany, in Spain and many other countries are thinking about at the moment. And you know what? Security seems to be top priority in people's minds at the moment in Europe. So people are a little bit scared of that what will happen for their security. And on the other hand, they are expecting for us in each country, in whole Europe, to take care of our security. And I think there is a very simple explanation for that. The world is changing very fast at the moment, also from the security point of view. And the other point is that when we are thinking about our basic needs as humans, first, we need food, shelter, we need water. But the second most important need for us humans is security. So I come from Finland, and maybe some of you know that Finland is the home of the Angry Birds. I think it's very Finnish. It's not funny birds, it's not flying birds, angry birds. But don't get me wrong, we Finns, we have other emotions too. So as you can see, just looking at me, yes, we are very serious people. But one thing I think, honestly, I think that what we are taking very seriously is security. We have had our independence more than 100 years, and I think we have had to taking our security very seriously. And I think, even said as a Finn, we have done a pretty good job. But also, of course, we have our own challenges, like this knife attack, what happened last year, is nowadays still investigated in Finland as a terrorist act. But otherwise, I would say that Finland is a very safe country at the moment. And I have been very pleased to see that when we are talking about the current and future threats, especially different kind of combination of threats, hybrid threats, this new European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats was just established last autumn in Helsinki. And nowadays 15 EU and NATO countries are participating in it. And the main purpose of this centre is to better understand the complexity of our security environment, the threats as well as the possibility from the security point of view, what we are experiencing nowadays. But of course you have to be in the information era and we are talking about here also, especially the psychological part of the security. Like you said very, very well, that I think that when we are talking about security in the information society, in the information societies, in the technological era, I think the main target of the hybrid influencing is our narratives. Someone, state actor, non-state actor, is trying to intentionally blur or even destroy our narrative. So I say that one different line what we have to take much, much more seriously in Europe is that we have to defend our narrative. So for example, if you go to the internet and look at this hybrid center of excellence, you can easily see two very similar looking web pages. But only the one is right. But you can check it also from the address line, which one you think that is the right one. And I think it's very important that when we are talking about security and when we are talking about fears, here today and tomorrow, we are talking about mostly not very radical wartime situation, but we are talking about normal day activities, normal day activities what we are experiencing. And I would say, especially from the hybrid influencing point of view, the normal day is the target what some opponent, what some aggressive actors, state actors or non-state actors, terrorists, what they are trying to affect. Make us fear. And I think it's very important to understand that when we are talking about security nowadays, especially in the technological era, the objective often from the fear point of view is to increase the society's unrest and instability. Instability is usually the objective. And that's why, a little bit from the scientific point of view, I have noticed that during the last few years in the security sciences, people, the scientists, are more investigating and trying to understand that how strongly this so-called objective reality, how things really are out there, and the subjective understanding of the objective reality. What is our, each one of us, perception about the reality? How these two different approaches are going or not going in hand to hand. Because, for example, if you are thinking about information influencing, it's not trying to change the reality, how things really are here in the society, here in whole Europe, but trying to change our images, trying to change our world perceptions, trying to change our narrative. And as far as I understand, I would say that when we are talking about security and when we are talking about fears, we are talking about more and more communication. And the role of the communication in security is becoming more and more important. So I call that when we are talking about fears and security, this is the new normal where we are living at the moment. The three key features. First of all, the speed of change, how fast things can really change, also in the physical world, but especially here in the digital world, in the cyberspace. And I call, and it's not only negative, that the current new normal in security can be called or summarized as unpredictable instability in a normal day. The second point is the complexity. I think that is the biggest challenge for us when we are trying to understand also the fears. How connected to different threats and risks are to each other. Like in this conference, we are talking about terrorism, we are talking about climate change, we are talking about artificial intelligence. Yes, very important topics. But I would say also it's very important us to pay more attention what is the interactions between these three different threats and risks. For example, what kind of implications climate change causes to the terrorism, and how terrorists can utilize in a bad way the artificial solutions what we are seeing already. And the third point is that the different dichotomies, like war, peace, external security, internal security, and so on, these dichotomies are blurring. And that is the reality in security. And the technology has a huge role in this development. We have to remember that when we are talking about humankind, us, we are developing at the moment more active and in more radical way technology that we have never done before. And I believe that the humankind will change more in next coming 30 years that we have changed during last 300 years because of the technology. And of course, when we are talking about hybrid influencing this digital space, different technological solutions, unfortunately, gives good opportunities to influence. And especially from the hybrid influencing point of view, we have to say that usually in cyberspace it's very hard to locate who is actually behind different activities, cyber technical activities or cyber psychological activities. These issues are still today very gray area in the international law, and it seems that also, especially the nation states, they are more and more outsourcing their different cyber operations to different non-state actors, like terrorist groups. And of course, terrorists knows this same thing. I think this front page of one of the magazines describes well that when we are talking about security and when we are talking about terrorism in 2018, we have to take care of and think about both the physical world, the world of the atoms, as well as the digital world. Because, for example, as mentioned, ISIS this morning already a few times, they are very active in the digital world. And at the moment, one of my research areas is that we are, with my researchers, we are trying to find out, of course, in the international cooperation, that what kind of different activities ISIS and some other terrorist groups are doing in the cyberspace. Mostly, they are spreading propaganda. They are trying to recruit new members. They are using the digital world to the communications and, of course, money transactions. And they are very active, I have to say. And it has also said, and I, in a way, agree that the deadliest startup in the world at the moment is ISIS. And technology, unfortunately, gives new opportunities to influence our daily life, the normal day. Just look at any social media platform at the moment. Even if we are trying to tackle these different digital activities, what the ISIS is doing, they are finding new ways. And I think, as we said, one of the key points, what they are trying to do is to increase fear among us and trying to blur or even destroy our narrative, what we are having here in Europe. And I think this is a good example that how, for example, ISIS is also like creating applications, what you can, for example, download to your smartphones. But the content of the application is a little bit different. This is the reality that we are living at the moment. And these kind of networks, what the terrorist groups have nowadays. As one example, when we are talking about utilizing the cyberspace for terrorist purposes. And at the moment, I have to say, especially with my international colleagues, like in UK, Germany, or United States, I have to say that we are getting more and more concerned if the terrorist groups like ISIS would be able to even paralyze our societies by using different cyber activities. Maybe they don't have the right skills at the moment, but I would say that as my opinion, I am more worried that in the dark streets of the internet, you can buy different vulnerabilities. You can buy different skills. And if they have money, and if they have will, and they usually do, the result can be very nasty. So I think these are the key points what we have to take into consideration when we are talking about fierce security in Europe in year 2018. I think we have to increase our awareness and understanding. We have to understand what is really happening around us. So situational awareness is one of the key points. And I would say that if the new normal is unpredictable instability, we have to have in our society as well as in our daily lives, in a way, the principle of continuing readiness. Whatever we are facing, whole of society involvement is very important. And that's why when we are talking about fighting against our fears, when we are talking about security, I would very much like to you, ladies and gentlemen, emphasize the principle of comprehensive security. How to involve the whole society, each citizen, different associations and organizations, private sector, and the public sector companies to work together. Because I think that is the key what we have to do in this fast-changing and complex security environment. But of course it's very important to keep in mind that nowadays security is not something what you can do only by your national resources inside your national borders. International cooperations with like-minded nations, like within Europe, is not a good thing, it's a necessity, what we have to do. And then last, the most important point. I did with my colleague professor last year a wide research. We wanted to find out what young people in Finland thinking about security at the moment and especially in coming years. And you know what? The most important issue when we were talking about security with the young people in Finland, they were talking about maintaining the trust inside the society. The trust between people, the trust in media, trust in policymakers, trust in authorities, trust in the functions of the society's vital functions. And the young people in Finland thought that our main national threat, as their opinion, is that we are losing our internal cohesion and trust inside our society. And put it up aside, if we have strong trust, if we have strong cohesion, as well as in my country, as well as in whole Europe, I would say that whatever comes behind our borders, we will survive it. So maybe the key question here is not how to strengthen security, but how to strengthen trust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. It was really a very interesting presentation and very good. I think we have a lot of topics to discuss, but first, another approach to this topic by Professor Peter Newman. I don't know, you have your own mic?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to the Foundation, to the Lycée Français, to everyone who has been involved in organizing this conference, and to everyone who's shown up. It's great to be able to speak to you today. And I thought instead of just going through a presentation, I thought I'd make it more interesting for you and talk to some of the points that have been previously mentioned, because as you will find out, I'm at the same time more alarmist and less alarmist than my two co-speakers. I also want to congratulate you for highlighting the issues that are driving change in our societies today: technology, social change, globalization, which is not only the movement of goods and capital, but also, as we now realize, the movement of people. And it's related to migration too. These are unprecedented drivers of change, perhaps more significant change than humans have ever experienced in the last 2 millennia. So we're living in truly unprecedented times, and all the issues that you're talking about today and tomorrow are consequences of these changes. Terrorism is just perhaps not even the most, by far, perhaps the least important consequence of that. So I want to do two things. The first thing is I want to talk about ISIS and what I believe the future trajectory is. And the second is I want to talk briefly about what follows from that. The first piece is that there is good news. I think certainly ISIS-related terrorism has never been a huge threat in Portugal. But across Europe, it is perhaps less of a threat now than it was 2 or 3 years ago. And there's 3 developments related to that. The first one is, of course, the military defeat of Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. 98% of the territory that ISIS held at the peak of its expansion in 2014 has been recaptured. The group used to have 40,000 fighters in Syria and Iraq. Now there are perhaps 3,000 left. And that's destroyed the safe haven that the organization enjoyed. It destroyed the operational basis of the organization. But perhaps most importantly, it destroyed the utopia that the organization was hoping to project. Let's not forget, nearly 40,000 people from 100 different countries across the world went to Syria and Iraq since 2012 to become part of that utopia. People were excited, some people were excited about the idea of creating a new society. They were being told by recruiters that in 1,000 years' time, people will still be talking about the young, brave men and women who went to join the caliphate, to rebuild the caliphate. And this was like a rush in 2014-15. People were super excited about going there because the success of the so-called caliphate seemed to illustrate that it was divinely inspired. That's no longer the case. It's been destroyed, and the utopia doesn't work anymore. In fact, for the first time, we're seeing a crisis of legitimacy for so-called Islamic State, where supporters of the group are asking, how can it be that a caliphate that was declared as a 1,000-year Reich in 2014 has been destroyed after only 3 years? So that's good news. The excitement about ISIS is gone. The second good news, and here I'm slightly contradicting my previous speaker, is a lot of people said that as a result of the rise of the caliphate, we will see, as a result of the decline of the caliphate, we will see a virtual caliphate rising. We will see a lot of people, instead of traveling to Syria, even more strongly than before, populating the internet. And in fact, what we have seen is exactly the opposite. There was one slide that showed the media offices of Islamic State. It was actually a slide that was put together by my colleague, Charlie Winter, and there were 37 media offices of Islamic State in 2014 producing between 5 and 7 videos a day. Now, of those 37 media offices, today, there are at best 5 media offices left. And if they are lucky, they're putting out between 5 and 7 videos a week, not 5 and 7 videos a day. So there has been a decline of the virtual infrastructure of Islamic State in parallel to the decline of the territorial, the physical infrastructure of Islamic State, and that must be good news. And we're also seeing that in the number of items that are being produced every week. The third positive development is that across Europe, even in France, we're seeing a decline in the tempo of terrorist operations. And for that, I want you to look not necessarily at successful terrorist attacks, but at attempted terrorist attacks. In practically every European country, we have now a lot less attempted terrorist attacks than we had 1 or 2 or 3 years ago. To give you just one example, in France this year, we had 4 attempted terrorist attacks and 1 successful terrorist attack. Now we are at the end of May. If you compare that to the year 2017, we had in France, over the entire year, 30 attempted terrorist attacks. So whilst the situation is still problematic, of course, it's bad news that 5 terrorist attacks have been attempted, of which 1 was successful. It is a lot less than the previous year. In Belgium, for example, they have recently lowered the threat level, and I think in the Netherlands they will soon do the same. Terrorist recruitment for groups like ISIS is down. So that's also good news. I think there's still a threat of terrorism in Europe, and I do unfortunately think we will still see terrorist incident, but the tempo has decreased significantly. The excitement for ISIS is over. So those are the 3 positive developments. There are also 2 potentially problematic developments. The first potentially problematic developments is that over the past 5 years, simply so many people have been radicalized, so many people have been drawn into the orbit of ISIS and related groups, that I think it is almost certain that we will be preoccupied with the consequences of the Syrian conflict for many years to come. The mobilization that has taken place over the past 5 years has been greater, has been bigger than any mobilization of foreign fighters in the last 8 years since the Spanish Civil War, effectively. And just like in Afghanistan in the 1980s, people were traveling to Afghanistan, then the conflict ended. And then for the following 2 decades, in the 1990s and 2000s, the veterans of that conflict were turning up in different wars. They were getting together, forming terrorist networks. I fear that the people who have fought in Syria, if that conflict ever ends, will turn up in different conflicts, will typically make these conflicts more fundamentalist, more violent, and longer. And I do think that also some of the people will turn up in their home countries and will remain active in terrorism. The second problem, so the consequences of this will be long-term. They will preoccupy us for many years. Just because there hasn't been a terrorist attack for 4 or 5 months, that shouldn't make us think that it's over. This will be with us, unfortunately, in one way or another, for most of our lifetimes. And the second factor that worries me is that, of course, we still have and will continue to have, and perhaps even worse than before, a very unstable situation in the Middle East. If you look at where ISIS has been successful, ISIS has always been successful in places that were very chaotic, where there was civil war, ungoverned territories that a group like ISIS took advantage of. We saw that in Syria, we saw that in Libya. We're now seeing that to some extent in Afghanistan and in Yemen. And as long as the Middle East remains in turmoil, as long as there are situations like this, I fear that groups like ISIS will be trying to take advantage of it, and that we will, as a consequence, also see people from Europe and from other places traveling to these areas and wanting to participate in these conflicts. And I'm particularly concerned about the rhetoric that is now coming out of a lot of Western capitals, especially Washington, D.C., which is gearing up towards a conflict with Iran. That would be the biggest of all conflicts. That would create not 1 or 2, that would create 6 or 7 Syria-type situations. And that would create turmoil for many years to come. And I think, I'm always very careful with making predictions, but on this point, I'm very certain that there will a lot of instability will come out of that, and a lot of terrorism as well. So whilst the situation right now is slightly better than it used to be 1 or 2 years ago, there are also uncertainties and variables in play that could actually make the situation bad again. So that's my overview of where we are in terms of the ups and downs of ISIS. How do we fight it? What do we do? And here I have a couple of things to add to what the previous speakers said. The thing that we need to be worried about in Europe more than anything is not the physical effects of terrorism. Of course, terrorists destroy things. They destroy people, they kill people, and they destroy things. And I want to reiterate what my previous speakers said here, which is that terror ultimately is about terror. It is about inducing fear. It is about making all of us fear our neighbors. And a result of that, to some extent, we've been able to witness over the past few years in Europe with the polarization of societies. The main beneficiaries of jihadist attacks in Europe over the past few years have been far-right parties. They've been not welcoming it, but they've been taking advantage of it. They've been exploiting a situation where societies have become more polarized. So as much as I'm concerned about the physical effects of terrorism, the people they kill and the stuff they destroy, I'm also and equally concerned about the political effects of terrorism, what it does to our software, what it does to the values and the ideas we have of our countries as societies in which people from different religions can live together peacefully. And that's why even liberal-minded people like myself have to fight terrorism. It's not only something that evil right-wing people do. You have to fight terrorism because you realize what it does to our societies. That's the first point. And here comes the point where I differ from my previous speakers, and I'm finishing in 3 minutes, don't worry. Because there's a clock ticking here, so I can see exactly how far ahead I am. Here comes the interesting part, though. Here's where I differ from my previous speakers. I do agree with your sentiment. You know, we shouldn't say blame Muslims for ISIS. I totally agree with that. Everyone understands that. But equally, I don't think it makes any sense or anyone buys it if we kind of refuse to speak about it. We have to speak about it in a nuanced way. So I give you an example which will make it clear to everyone. I'm German. I come from Germany, but I live in England. And whenever there are neo-Nazis in Germany doing something terrible, people come to me, English people come to me and say, you Germans again. And then I say, hold on, you know, I'm not a neo-Nazi. I have nothing to do with the neo-Nazi. But then I think about it, and then I realize, of course, those neo-Nazis, whilst they are not like me, and whilst they do not represent my kind of Germany, they do represent a Germany. They represent a very extreme form of Germany that historically has existed. I cannot deny that. They're laying claim to a form of Germany that exists, that is real, that I don't like, that I reject, that I will dedicate my life towards fighting, but I cannot deny that they are German. And so I think that's the way we should talk about jihadist extremists. They do represent a minority of a minority within Islam. They can lay claim to an interpretation of Islam which undoubtedly is extremist. And that's why they don't represent Islam, but in a way they are Islamic. And that's why I would differ from you. I don't think it makes sense to deny them that they have claimed to some element of Islam that is out there and that we need to fight in many different ways. Of course, a lot of them are not very theologically sophisticated, but there are some people within that movement who can cite texts and who are referencing Islam. And I think that is one part of it that we need to fight as well. And if we're denying that it has anything to do with it, we're denying ourselves an opportunity to fight it. That's my point. We have to talk about it in a nuanced way. And the same goes about refugees, right? So I come from Germany. I was on TV a lot in 2015, 2016, when all the refugees came into the country. Interviewed a lot. And like a lot of liberal people, I said, let's completely separate these two issues. They have nothing to do with each other. There's refugees, they are good people, they are fleeing from persecution, and on the other hand, there's terrorism, and that's a different issue. And a lot of people said that in the media, and a lot of people on the far right, of course, were doing exactly the opposite. They were saying, it's the same thing, we're having a lot of potential terrorists coming in. Then the summer of 2016 happened, and we had terrorist attacks in Germany. We had an axe attack in my hometown, the town of Würzburg, carried out by a young refugee. 2 weeks later, we had an attempted suicide attack in the town of Ansbach, carried out by a refugee. We had a terrorist cell in Düsseldorf, composed of Iraqi refugees. And it became harder and harder for people like me to pretend that these topics have nothing to do with each other. In fact, the other people, the far-right people, were saying, look, we were right all along. All of them are terrorists. Every week we have an incident where a refugee is trying to attack us. And in fact, by trying to pretend it has nothing to do with each other, we made it easier for the people on the far right to pretend that all refugees are potential terrorists. And that's why I'm saying, out of my own experience, and I was criticized a lot, out of my own experience, I'm saying we need to come to a nuanced discussion about this. We have to say, of course, refugees radicalize like everyone else. Why should refugees be the one population group that doesn't radicalize? Right? We have 20 to 25% converts, people from Christian families who join ISIS. But of course, refugees, some of them, a very small minority, radicalizes too. We need to understand who they are, and we need to put a lot of good measures in place in order to minimize that, because if refugees become terrorists, it damages the fabric of our society and our ability to welcome people in need. And that's why it's important not to say black, not to say white, but to have a nuanced discussion and try to educate people about that, not either say all refugees are terrorists or none of them are terrorists. Mm-hmm. And that's where I slightly differ from my co-speakers, in the sense that I do think we need to be honest, we need to be empirically informed and evidence-based, and we need to make our judgment based on the facts on the ground, educate people, and try to come to sensible, honest, pragmatic solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was very stimulating. I think we have a lot of interesting topics to discuss, for sure. I'll just throw one first question, and then I'll open it also for the audience. Because we don't have much time, I'll ask everyone to be brief in the answers. So, taking on that idea that all of you mentioned about narratives, how important is the narrative in fighting our fears and leading and dealing with the threats we have to deal with. So how can we actually, do you think, so this would be for the first two speakers, would this nuanced way be a solution in a context where political debate is also very, it's feeding and it's getting fueled by the polarization, and a lot of parties are growing up with specifically fighting this nuance. They don't want nuance debate. They want a polarized society. So in sort of way, is this political debate eating itself? I mean, is there a solution out of this? So this would be my opening question. And I'll ask quem tiver na audiência questões, por favor, levante o braço. Aqui na terceira fila, por favor, este senhor. Eu espero que há microfone que vai a caminho. Podem todos fazer as questões na língua que preferirem, que há tradução para os speakers.
Muito obrigado. Queria felicitar vivamente a Presidente deste colóquio, a Annie, e que inclusivamente toda a sessão que eu ouvi, inclusivamente a mesa, e as felicitações a todos os palestrantes. Há uma questão que eu penso que é muito importante e queria felicitar vivamente esta juventude e toda esta dota Assembleia que aqui se encontra. Eu penso que é extraordinariamente importante a educação logo pelo berço, logo de início. E felicito vivamente esta maneira de apresentar e de estar, porque acho que isto devia ser um estigma, inclusivamente, para todas as instituições de ensino no nosso país. E digo isto porque eu sou de uma geração antiga, em que havia uma educação formatada em princípios de famílias, inclusivamente toda esta sucessão de educação se tem alterado, inclusivamente até com, infelizmente, possibilidades sociais em que os seus primeiros contactos são exatamente na escola.
Olha,
e é aí que...
o mais breve possível, só para podermos ter mais perguntas da audiência. Por favor.
E aí sou muito rápido. A relação que acho que é esse ponto de educação que deve ser um dos fatores profiláticos da honestidade, da honra, da maneira de estar, porque o próprio dedo que carrega um gatilho é o próprio dedo que é capaz de desmotivar todo um ataque terrorista. Queria felicitar a doutora Ana Gomes, que pela sua maneira de estar e pela sua seriedade e execuções, é claro que eu poderia estar aqui a falar em imensas questões, e uma das pontos cruciais é que é de pequenino que se tem que tomar as devidas contas no ensinamento, e serão eles, precisamente em alguns países até mais educados, que foram marginalizados, que foram desprezados em relação com este fator muito importante que se chama a educação, o respeito e principalmente a seriedade. A este congresso, podia dizer muito mais coisas, mas compreendo e a todos muito obrigado.
Desculpa. Portanto, first question is about role of education in this. Há mais uma questão ali atrás e depois esta senhora aqui na quarta ou quinta fila. E depois julgo que não teremos, peço imensa desculpa. Peço que seja o mais breve possível.
Sim.
Está bem? Muito obrigado.
Eu sou estudante de comunicação, sou bolseiro de investigação, de um centro de investigação. Acho fabuloso estarem a estudar o medo. É a primeira vez que eu vejo, e não era para vir para aqui hoje, mandar um e-mail e vim a correr. Acho que o painel é muito interessante. Eu estou ligado às ciências sociais e acho que falta alguém das ciências sociais relativamente à comunicação para estar no painel. Eu explico um pouco. O terrorismo é uma evidência. Eu ponho como principal meio do medo geral, não os terroristas, não estou a desculpabilizá-los, mas sim os mídia que vão comunicando e vão difundindo este medo. O título da minha tese de doutoramento tem a ver com o atentado de Bataclan. Eu estou a tentar perceber como é que o medo do terrorismo chegou a Portugal, e os meus estudos de caso são o atentado de Paris e o de Bruxelas, uns meses a seguir, em 2016. E o que eu vejo é isso mesmo, as constatações que eu tenho vindo a ter dos primeiros estudos é mesmo esse. É assim, os mídias são o principal, e isso é que não foi falado aqui. A educação falou-se em narrativas, mas é assim, os mídias arranjam as narrativas, que todos nós acabamos por consumir, e que vai difundir o medo. Eu dou dois exemplos muito concretos.
Então que sejam mesmo muito rápidos, por favor, que é para podermos passar o microfone.
A 2001, aos atentados às Torres Gêmeas, e ao que se passou a seguir. A seguir houve um congresso, e foi passado em congresso uma lei que fez com que as liberdades da população norte-americana fossem todas elas rebaixadas, e foi tratada esta discussão em 40 dias. Em 40 dias decidiu-se o que hoje é o Patriot Act. Se forem à internet conseguem perceber, quem não sabe. Outro exemplo. A determinada altura, e quando ocorreram os atentados de Paris, houve alguém que largou um caixote ali na zona da Expo. Todos os canais portugueses fizeram emissões em direto para tentar perceber o que eram esses caixotes e porque é que isso era considerado terrorismo. Todos eles avançaram com uma narrativa de terrorismo. Portanto, para terminar, eu coloco aqui os mídias como principais motores do medo. Pronto, e faria falta um congresso.
Muito obrigado. Eu Eu vou tentar, vamos fazer o seguinte, eu vou passar a bola aqui aos nossos palestrantes e depois vou ver se ainda tivermos 1 minuto ou 2, eu volto a passar a palavra à audiência. Portanto, political discourse, role of education and the role of media in this relationship with terrorism. Professora, a doutora.
Eu sou inteiramente de acordo que ter uma linguagem nuance é importante, mas é importante ter a linguagem nuance para não omitir que há refugiados e que muitos são feitos em nome do Islão, mas ao mesmo tempo também desmitificar para a opinião pública e educar a opinião pública que a maior parte das vítimas são justamente muçulmanos e, portanto, e por outro lado, que isto é uma perversão do Islão e é exatamente por isso que nós não falamos de terrorismo católico na Irlanda, quando obviamente a religião era o aspecto central também do conflito. E, portanto, a narrativa de facto importa e a nuance importa. Por outro lado, o papel da educação, com certeza, é fundamental. E eu acho que nas questões da prevenção tem havido insuficiente esforço e meios na aposta de programas de prevenção da radicalização, que têm que envolver as comunidades locais, as escolas, apoio às famílias, atores diversos da sociedade articulados, e envolvem, obviamente, um esforço de inclusão dos jovens. Os percursos de radicalização são muito diferenciados, mas, em regra, têm famílias, não é por acaso que muitos dos terroristas europeus que atacam, que têm atacado, são de famílias da imigração de segunda e terceira geração e que se sentem ostracizados. O próprio presidente Macron foi visitar certas zonas da HLM e disse isto fabrica exclusão e fabrica terrorismo. Tem muito a ver com a educação, tem muito a ver com as oportunidades que a educação dá de inclusão. A questão da inclusão é uma questão absolutamente central. Quanto ao papel dos mídias, sim, é muito importante. Mas eu acho que nós temos que... Os mídias, por um lado, têm que reportar e têm que saber alertar a população, mas não alarmar no sentido de inflacionar o medo. E eu acho que aqui em Portugal, lamento dizer, mas acho que aqui em Portugal as pessoas não sabem o que é o medo do terrorismo. Só vão saber no dia em que houver um atentado terrorista. E as implicações... Já houve portugueses a morrerem em atentados terroristas na Tunísia, em França, no Bataclan, etc. Mas não é... portanto, o papel dos mídias é, de facto, fundamental na educação da opinião pública e não criar o pânico e não dar aso às tais medidas ultrasecuritárias que, no fundo, fazem o jogo dos terroristas. Porque se o objetivo dos terroristas é destruir o nosso modo de vida democrático, as nossas liberdades, se somos nós próprios, em nome de combater o terrorismo, a coartá-las, então estamos a fazer o jogo dos terroristas. E é por isso que eu recuso essas reações à puxada por parte de dirigentes europeus, muitas vezes ineficazes. Por exemplo, há áreas, não falámos hoje aqui, mas uma questão que me parece absolutamente essencial é a questão do financiamento do proselitismo. Hoje que estamos cada vez mais a ver os ataques terroristas têm sido low cost, chamados low cost attacks. Mas os recursos são para o proselitismo do terrorismo e é uma área onde os governantes europeus, designadamente, não têm feito nem de perto nem de longe o que era preciso, apesar de todas as diretivas contra o branqueamento de capitais, que também é sobre, justamente, o financiamento do terrorismo. Eu terminaria dizendo, exatamente, citando aquela carta que foi espetacularmente lida, temos que ter sempre esta noção presente. Os mídia, ou todos os operadores, decisores políticos e os cidadãos, temos de ter consciência do perigo dos terrorismos. Eu não entro em lado nenhum onde não esteja sempre hoje a olhar para se há sacos de plástico ou sacos deixados em qualquer lado. É um reflexo que me ficou, justamente desses anos na Indonésia, em que vivi diretamente com a ameaça terrorista todos os dias. Mas é preciso, sobretudo, ter esse reflexo fundamental. Vous n'aurez pas ma haine.
Thank you. Very good questions and very wide questions. Let me summarize. In Finland, we are talking about a lot at the moment concerning about the information influencing. The psychological part, like you said, of today's fears, and especially how different actors, terrorists and others, are utilizing the digital space, cyberspace, for their purposes. And I would say that from our perspective, as well as what we are discussing in the Hybrid Center of Excellence, there are 4 main points what we are emphasizing when we are thinking about how to respond. Very shortly. First is the role of the education. Absolutely crucial. But then at the same time, I think it's, as a university professor, I think it's very important for us to ask that what are the skills that the citizens need in our digital societies in 2018? Because they are a little bit different than they were 15, 20 years ago. So we have to update also our education system. And that is something what we are not doing very effectively at the moment, as far as I see in Europe. The second point is that we have to clarify more our narrative. And I would say that we humans, we don't really understand what is the role of the narrative in the psychological point of view. Because it has been proved in many researches that when we are thinking about our world perceptions, we as an educated, rational humans, we like to think that the 95% of what we are thinking is based on facts and how things really are, and 5% of the stories. Actually, the opposite is true. And in the digital era, the narrative, what are our main principles are extremely important. The third point, I very much agree, the responsible of the media. And I think when we are talking about the future of the media, we are talking about, like mentioned here in this morning, the role of the algorithms. And I would even say, to sharpen a little bit, that who control algorithms in the future controls more and more our thoughts, our values, our perceptions. And that is something that I would really like to see when we are talking about algorithms of the technological giants coming from the United States or China. What you politicians in the parliament, you have to be more effective. And the fourth point is that we are talking about the resilience. Because we are living, like I said in my short presentation, in a world where unexpected situations, we will face them for sure, also in the coming years, terrorists or from the other actors. But maybe too much we are thinking about when we are thinking about our response to like a functional resilience. What are our concrete functions when we are dealing with these different situations? I would say that the role of the mental resilience is getting more and more important. And that's why I very much, when I'm thinking about the security nowadays and in the future, I emphasize the role of the communications when we are talking about, because when we are talking about fears like we are here today, we have to understand, and we very often underestimate it in our pragmatic way to approach security, that security is always a feeling. It's always a perception of the reality. And that is something where we have to do better what we are doing at the moment. Thank you.
So I want to briefly say something about education and why it matters. Education shouldn't necessarily, or isn't necessarily about telling young people not to become terrorists or telling young people to be Democrats. It's about something else. Amartya Sen, the famous Indian philosopher, once wrote about us, all of us, having a lot of different identities. I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a professor, I'm German, I'm European, I'm a Londoner, which is confusing. So it becomes very complicated. But most people, most of us, are able to reconcile our identities. When I meet with my parents, I'm primarily the son. When I'm sitting here with you, I'm primarily the professor. We're different things at different times, and most of us manage these different identities very well. Here comes the point. What extremists, whether they are far-right extremists or jihadist extremists or any kind of extremists want, They want you to reduce your complexity. One of my colleagues, Kumar Ramakrishna, described radicalization as a massive identity reduction exercise. A massive identity reduction exercise. They want you to forget about all of these different identities you have and identify only with one thing. If you're far-right extremist, if you're neo-Nazi, they want you to think yourself as an Aryan. And they want you to define everyone else by whether he or she is being an Aryan or not an Aryan. And depending on whether they are Aryan or not Aryan, they are friends or enemies. Black and white, friends, enemies, in-group, out-group. That's what all extremists want. They want you to forget about the complexity of your identities. And that's why education is important. Because what good education does is to foster and nurture and promote and make it possible for you to reconcile having these different identities and live with them and not believe anyone who comes to you and says to you, you're only one thing. You're never just one thing, you're many things, and good education teaches you to understand and appreciate how many different things you are. That's what education is about.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Muito obrigado a todos. Dou por concluído este primeiro painel e julgo que o painel seguinte será sobre... agora não tenho aqui o programa à frente. De qualquer modo teremos 10 minutos agora para pausa e café. Está bem? Muito obrigado. Até já.